Have you ever done anything morally right? You ever done anything morally wrong? You know, the answer to this question has a serious bearing on the existence of God. If there is no God, then there can't be anything objectively, morally right or wrong. If there are objective moral values, then God must exist. The spokespeople for atheism, they've long understood this truth. Atheistic philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre summarized this reality very well in his lecture in 1946. He said, "Everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist." If God does not exist, Sartre said, we have no values or commands that could legitimize our behavior. Cornell University professor William Provine once stated, "No purposive principles exist in nature. Humans are complex organic machines that die completely with no survival of the soul or psyche. No inherent moral or ethical laws exist, nor are there any absolute guiding principles for human society. The universe cares nothing for us, and we have ultimately no meaning in life." You see, the atheistic community admits that if there is objective moral value, then there is a God. But instead of saying, yes, some things are objectively morally right, and some things are objectively morally wrong, the atheist is forced to say, therefore, there is no objective moral value. Therefore, nothing is really ultimately wrong. Now, let's put this in an argument form. If we were to do that, we would say premise number one, if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. Premise number two would then be objective moral values exist. And the conclusion would be, therefore, God exists. Now, as we look at this idea, deep down, I think you and I both understand some things are ultimately right and some things are ultimately wrong, and the standard for those has to be a supernatural, personal creator. You know, when the founders of the United States of America signed their names on that document that was so important to the independence of our country, the Declaration of Independence, when they stated, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain rights. And among those rights are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now, if you get the Creator out of the picture, where do basic human rights come from? From where do they originate? Where can you derive the idea that all humans have basic human rights that morally are objective values, that we should treat humans different than we treat plants, that we should treat humans different than we treat bacteria or mice or rats or bugs? Well, you see, without a God, the objective moral values as to how we should treat other people, well, they vanish. And as Sartre said, if there is no God, then all things are permissible, including perpetrating tragic, horrible crimes against our fellow humans. Now, let me explain to you how that comes into play in real life. There's a man by the name of Dan Barker. He is a well-known atheist. He is involved in debates all over the country. And he was involved in a debate one time with a man named Peter Payne. And that was a debate on moral values and God. And Barker said that there is nothing morally, objectively right or wrong. He could think of an objection in every case. He could think of a suggestion where any action under certain circumstances would be right or would be wrong. And so a student, after the debate, when the question and answer session was open, a student came up to the microphone and said, "Mr. Barker, I heard that you said that all actions could be morally right or wrong, depending on the context." And that student then said, "When would it be right to rape a person?" Now, that's a question that would take you aback, of course, but Dan Barker said, "Well, some of these things, they just don't happen very often. We wouldn't find ourselves in a position where we would need to make that kind of decision." But then he said, "Yes, I can think of a case." He said, "If aliens somehow came down and said, we're going to kill every person in the world if you do not rape a person," he said, "then it would be your moral obligation to do that." Basically, what he's saying is there's no objective moral values, that rape is something that would just be situational. Well, I knew he had said that in his debate with Mr. Payne, and so when I was in a debate with him, I asked him a similar question, and then I said, what about 2 girls? What about raping 2 people? Would that be okay? And he said, yes, if it would save all of humanity. I said, what about 2,000? He said, yes. I said, what about 2 million? And here's what I thought, I guess maybe naively. I thought that if I could get one of the leading atheist spokespeople to admit that he did not see that raping 2 million people would be objectively morally wrong, then I would have gotten others who followed his reasoning to distance themselves from that atheistic belief and understand that, yes, that is objectively morally wrong. And if it is objectively morally wrong, then there has to be a God. But even Mr. Barker, as he looked at me and looked out at the audience, he said it would be his moral responsibility to do that. But then he said, I would probably hate myself, I would probably kill myself afterward, but I would do it to save all of humanity. Let me ask you a question. If there's no objective moral values, why would you hate yourself for doing what was morally right in that situation? Why would you probably kill yourself for doing something that you wouldn't say is morally, objectively wrong? You see what's going on there? Deep inside, each one of us knows some things are right, some things are wrong, and it does not matter the context. It would always be objectively morally right and objectively morally wrong to do certain things. There's one atheistic blogger who was blogging for Atheist Portal, and then she came out and said, hey, I no longer can blog for this organization because I don't believe in atheism anymore. And her reason was this. She said, I started asking my fellow atheists, where do objective moral values originate? Where do they derive from? And she said, every single answer that I got was insufficient. She said, I knew that some things were right and some things were wrong. And as I tried to find an answer to that from the atheistic philosophy, I could not. And here's what she said. She said that moral values are things that are there, and we uncover them like archaeologists. We don't build them like architects. And she said, because of that, because I knew some things were right and some things were wrong, I had to leave atheism and begin to believe that there is a standard for moral value, and that standard is God. If you ever have done something that was right, if you've ever done something that was objectively morally wrong, then God exists.